and welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that can take it just as well as it can dish it out, so long as it's by its own hand. I've made fun of a ton of music on this show over the years, and I've also hinted several times that I pursued the rock and roll dream for longer than I care to admit. So today, let's start chipping away at what really is the ultimate oddity, my music career. Might as well discuss it while the whole band is still alive and willing to discuss it. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you the ultimate tale of teenage hubris. Regardless of whether or not I would admit it at the time, I was something of a music connoisseur from an early age. Having said that, the only time I gave a damn in music class in school was when I was allowed to have temporary custody of the coveted rhythm sticks. And no, I never hit anyone with them. Anyway, fast forward to 1995, and I nagged my parents into buying me a guitar. I got a cheap, quasi-classical, nylon-stringed guitar, kinda like the one Willie Nelson plays, which, if memory serves, set my folks back $60. My parents also got me a Hal Leonard beginner's book, which came with a CD. I could never comprehend anything in the book or on the CD. Unsurprisingly, I no longer have either of them. Nonetheless, I haplessly banged away on that guitar for about 2 years, never learning any chords or even how to tune the damn thing. In 1997, perhaps against my folks' better judgment, I succeeded in nagging them into getting me an electric guitar, specifically a black Fender Squier Stratocaster, which I proceeded to haplessly bang away at, albeit usually minus the amp, for many years to come. By 2000, I'd accrued a precious few piano lessons at school, and I was usually blowing my allowance and lawn mowing money on whatever I could pull out of the used vinyl bin at a nearby record store, which was usually 60s, 70s, and 80s rock and pop. Now, I'd already been taking tentative stabs at my own, if you will, compositions as far back as 1998, but by this point, my mission became clear, and that was to be a one-man rock and roll force of nature. But knowing I would need more than just my guitars to accomplish this task, for Christmas of that year, I wanted a keyboard and an electric drum kit, and yes, I got both. Specifically, a Yamaha PSR GX76 keyboard and a Yamaha DD50 digital drum kit. This 15-year-old, yeah, I just gave away my age, was ready to conquer the world.
Feel like a good cry? Then check out Silent Sunday Nights, John Gilbert, Gloria Swanson, and other great stars of the silent screen. Silent Sunday Nights, next on Turner Classic Movies.
Sometime around 1996 or 7, I developed a strange fondness for silent film. Seriously, going into the early 2000s, I managed to fill up a ton of VHS tapes with Turner Classic Movies' Silent Sunday Nights and AMC's periodic 4 a.m. showings of Silence. So it should come as no surprise that my first album was going to be a conceptual piece using the silence as a launching point. The title, Silence is Golden. But of course, addle-brained teenager that I was, I didn't really follow through. At the beginning of 2001, I started working on my debut using my new instruments and Nothing more than my dad's old handheld cassette recorder and that little sound recorder program that Windows used to have so I could overdub. Let me explain the process. Generally, if the track involved more than one instrument, I'd record the first part to the tape recorder, record the next part with the existing stuff playing back on tape into the Windows recorder, then repeat the cycle until the song was finished. Since I couldn't hear most of the playback, the levels are largely random. Oh yeah, and the Windows recorder wouldn't record for more than 1 minute at a time. Between the primitive recording setup and my sheer ineptitude, you can imagine how well this went. Let's discuss the, I guess, songs. Cheeky little monkey that I am, I figured the best way to start my Silence is Golden album was with an extended period of silence. To get things going in terms of actual sound, I came up with the brilliant idea of not so subtly walking into the room, setting down my tape recorder, hitting the play button, which started a recording of myself strumming an E minor 11 9 chord. Read the chord that the open strings on a guitar makes in standard tuning. This segues, rather violently, because, album rock, into an attempted classical piano theme to the 1926 Lillian Gish version of The Scarlet Letter. Because I spent too much time listening to Pink Floyd and Emerson, Lake and Palmer back then, I added the arbitrary Scene 73 to the title, because I thought it sounded cool. I'd be willing to bet there aren't even 73 scenes in the whole movie. Anyway, this piece is simply 5 minutes of me attempting to sound graceful and dramatic at the same time. I failed miserably on both counts. Because I knew that all good rocker dudes needed to have at least some lyrics and, worse yet, vocals in their material, this meant having to, rather grudgingly, take the mic. I couldn't sing, I knew it, but I had no choice. So I deliberately buried my vocal under an avalanche of intentionally too loud guitars. I think this song was some sort of especially off-kilter attempt at country rock. Oh yeah, and this track has nothing to do with the Silence is Golden concept. Get used to hearing that phrase, by the way. Back in 1998, I had run outside with my dad's cassette recorder one day to capture the sounds of beautiful downtown Aurora's tornado/civil defense sirens. With these sounds in tow, I tried to build a song stemming from the sirens. What I got was a 13-minute noise excursion, with about 3 minutes of probably public domain incidental music from one of my silent movies built in for no reason whatsoever. This piece was titled The Battle of Elderbush Gulch, after the 1913 D.W. Griffith short. This recording has since been lost. Anyway, not wanting to let something relevant to my semi-precious concept go, I dredged up this piece, rewrote the music, and took another stab at it. Now the piece goes as follows. 2.5 minutes of the civil defense sirens, 2.25 minutes of assorted aborted instrumental concepts, one of which is accompanied by the same incidental music from '98, capped off by a precious few seconds of more of that incidental music. As best as I can tell, there is no battle, implied or otherwise, on this track. This would be the second vocal track on the album, and the second to bear no relation to the silence's golden concept. This time out, I wanted to do a stark, doomy folk song, with a lot of gratuitous guitar solos. Thing was, I really wanted the sound of a steel string acoustic guitar on this one. Of course, I didn't own one yet, so the best alternative was to use my electric guitar unplugged. Because I knew my vocals, given the arrangement, would be more prominent on this one, I opted to merely speak the words. I also capped off the recording with about a minute of ambient audio I'd recorded outdoors, presumably to give the all clear after the sirens that populated the Elderbush track. This cut also stands out in that it's the only one on the album that doesn't segue to or from another track.
Open up my front door. Look down at the floor. I see the paper boy has brought more. News about use and abuse. Alright.
Named after Rudolph Valentino's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, this was to be my mega-ambitious progressive instrumental. Of course, what I got was an 8-minute cacophony. For whatever reason, I thought it would be cool to end this one with a little intentionally nightmare-inducing noise collage.
For the past 5 years, we've held this contest to give aspiring composers the chance to score one of the many silent films in our TCM library, movies that we otherwise wouldn't be able to show because they have no music tracks.
Throughout the 2000s, Turner Classic Movies hosted a Young Film Composers competition. Every year, they'd dust off at least one silent film from the MGM vault, cull a few clips from them, post them for download. You'd record and or write a paper score for one of those clips, and you'd submit it. The winner got at least $10,000 in prize money, and better yet, the job of scoring one of those languishing MGM silents. The film du jour of 2001 was the 1928 Greta Garbo vehicle A Woman of Affairs, which had already been on video, but still. I was too young to enter the competition, you had to be at least 18, but nonetheless, I set about writing 2 pieces for the film. One of these was a theme for the movie. I really tried my darndest to write a good dramatic theme, but it was awful. In an early moment of self-awareness, I figured this POS would sound better backwards, so I simply reversed the recording I'd made, and lo and behold, it blew the real piece away. This is actually one song that I spread out over 2 tracks, because segues are cool, no matter how pointless. This was my first attempt at a straight pop rock tune. It's also an especially dumb and, of course, noisy Jackson Browne knockoff. Once again, this bears no relation to the silence is golden concept. The final vocal cut on the album was my second attempt at some sort of pseudo-progressive epic. Of course, Circle Sky was a Monkees tune, and I loved the Head film from which it came, but aside from that, there's no Monkees connection. Again, I just thought it sounded cool. This one is memorable for my attempts at making the vocal a little more prominent, albeit hiding under an ocean of homebrew reverb, as well as the recurring, nagging guitar line. More Jackson Browne knockoff lyrics here, plus no relation to the silence is golden concept.
There is a well below the circle sky, out beyond the plains where the waters have dried. They gather around it and do their dance. They throw a pebble down the well to touch the fiery surface of its head.
This was my attempt at scoring the TCM-provided scene to A Woman of Affairs. This was another serious stab at composition, at the quote-unquote piano, of course, and this was also the moment that I realized I couldn't make my two hands do two separate things at the same time. My solution? A one-handed score to the scene. The scene in question ends, and as such my album, with one of the characters jumping out a window to his death. In retrospect, this seems rather appropriate given the rather reckless nature of this album. Partway through the making of Silence is Golden, I experienced something of an epiphany. Unfortunately, it didn't involve trying to learn an instrument, or trying to improve as a singer, or trying to write better songs. Hell no. I figured what was really holding me back was my lack of multi-track recording equipment. So, partway through the making of Silence is Golden, I started saving up for a 4-track cassette recorder. And shortly after finishing the album, I acquired said multi-tracker, and I set about making album number 2, which charitably could be considered just an extended experiment with the new gear. But anyway, album number 2, and boy is it a number 2 of an album, is called Around the Sun. And if you thought the first album sucked, you ain't heard nothing yet. I hate this album. I really hate this album. Anyway, in April of 2001, I had saved enough money for the cheapest 4-track cassette multi-tracker available at the local Mars Music, a now-defunct chain. I got a hot pink Fostex X14. Why hot pink, you might ask? It was $10 less than the other colors. This unit featured a built-in microphone and 4 tremendously awkward faders, and could record only 1 track at a time. And that was about it. Of course, this was light years ahead of my then current setup. And naturally, the first thing I did when I acquired this unit was improvise a Pink Floyd sort of thing. But then it was down to business. The first thing I did was write and record another simplistic, quasi-classical piece with a tie to silent film. This one was called Sparrows, and was intended as a theme to the 1926 Mary Pickford film of the same name. Honestly, this is as good as this album gets. I'd recently gotten somewhat into jazz fusion, jazz rock kind of stuff. I hadn't been able to attempt anything like that under the previous recording setup, so naturally the next order of business was to take a stab at that idea. This was called Days of Wine and Roses, of course after the Jack Lemmon movie, which I hadn't actually seen yet. But then things went completely off the rails. I suddenly remembered that I had set out to be a one-man rock and roll wrecking crew and that I had a world to conquer, damn it. Oh yeah, and I was now socially and politically enlightened to boot. So I proceeded to, very quickly, write a bunch of lyrics, no music, detailing all the injustice and isolation in the world, the latter being my personal favorite. Among the lyrical gems from this album are
Nobody knows my name, but everybody knows my scene. Nobody knows me or all the shit that I've seen. In a place I left my mark forever to be seen. I have no intention to fulfill your twisted dream. I don't care what you say, I will do that because I don't care. King Hollow is gone, the king has been forgotten. Somebody needs to come in and let us be Charleston. Walk slow and run, check the shiny handle on your gun. It's too late now, I think the end has begun.
and my personal favorite,
I sold my soul to the man in my hole. I am the loner, I work alone.
Also in my quest to prove my rock and roll mettle, I undertook the task of creating, in my mind, the most rocking sequence of all time. I took two sets of the lyrics I had come up with and used them as a launching point for a pair of extended noise jams that'd make the Velvet Underground run for cover. In the process, creating a grand total 16-minute plus marathon of pure rock debauchery. Getting back to the technical end of things, by this point I now had access to a standalone CD burner, which is currently in my possession, which I had no idea how to use at the time. For whatever reason, every component to a stereo system was stuck into the input of this thing via a dangerously long series of piggyback cables. Naturally, anything I ever plugged into it was at the end of that long line, causing a wash of lossy, feedbacky noise over everything I did. This is what my original CD of this album sounded like. Years later, after I'd acquired my current CD burner, we're talking 2009, I decided to go back and take a new pass at the tapes so I could make myself a non-tin can version of the album. It took me forever to find the tapes because, well, I never bothered to label them at the time. Once I found the 2 cassettes worth of Around the Sun material, I realized that I was missing one of the tracks from the album, namely a tune called 5 More Days, which you just heard a bit of. So I found the multi-tracks, also then unlabeled, dug out my more recent Tascam Porta Studio, because I'd long since sold the Fostex, and I went to work. It was here that I remembered that I learned the hard way that there is effectively no B-side to the tape when dealing with a 4-tracker. In other words, the last 45 seconds to the song were lost. These 45 seconds thankfully weren't music. They were of some ambient outdoor noises, a la Save Time Fades Away from Silence is Golden, which functioned as a link to Sparrows. I proceeded to grudgingly re-record these last 45 seconds. As of early 2018, I have yet to locate the original mixdown cassette with 5 More Days, assuming it ever existed at all. Really, a perfect microcosm of everything wrong with this album, if there ever was. Alright, I've got a bit of an extended epilogue for you here, so bear with me. Back in 1971, Harry Nilsson put out an album called Aerial Pandemonium Ballet. And on this album, he took what he felt were the best moments from his first 2 proper albums, which were called Pandemonium Shadow Show and Aerial Ballet, and the title becomes apparent. And he remixed and in some cases partially re-recorded those tracks. Now, sometime in the latter half of 2001, I stumbled onto my copy of that album. And of course, this seemed like an absolutely brilliant concept to me. So in February of 2002, I decided to make my own little aerial pandemonium ballet and take the best or least worst moments from my first 2 albums and take another crack at them. Sort of. I remixed a few cuts from Around the Sun, and they turned out no better than the original mixes. And I re-recorded another one from Around the Sun completely, and that was a live rendition of Graceless Age, which goes on for nearly 16 minutes. And as for the Silence is Golden cuts, there wasn't really anything I could do with those, so I simply reused those. But anyway, the final product was called Around the Silent and Golden Sun, and this actually did get released around March of 2002 on the old mp3.com site, download only, and it sold exactly 0 copies. But nonetheless, fast forward to December, and something called the All Suck Review, that bodes well, got their hands on the redo of Graceless Age, and they reviewed it. So to close things out today, I'm going to leave you with a nice extended clip from that cut, and I'll let you read the text of that review. And this is not one of my little jokes. This is 100% real. I just didn't know how to take a screenshot back then. So anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I don't resume the saga of my so-called music career, largely because I'm pretty sure my ratings are going to take a pretty good nosedive over this one. See you next time.
I sold my soul to the man in my hole.
And welcome to another episode's worth of me spilling out my past for your amusement. Well, let me just say that I was genuinely surprised by the reaction I got to the first episode I did on my little so-called music career. As I predicted, it didn't do that well numbers-wise, but the people that watched it really seemed to like it. I got a lot more comments than usual, and they were mostly positive. But more tellingly, ever since then, I've gotten a pretty regular stream of comments and tweets and emails and stuff asking me, when are you going to do Volume 2? And given that I'm still trying to iron out the kinks of the new Archive HQ, right down to this little set of mine, it felt like a good time to do an episode that wouldn't require much in the way of research or dumpster diving on my part. So with that, today let's finish up my outsider music period and pretty thoroughly bottom out, both musically and personally, in the process. Be careful what you wish for, dear viewers. Anyway, let's start things off with the bright spot of today's episode. This was my third album, and it's my favorite one of this period, and it's also what's on the box today. This one's called Fallen Windows. Sometime towards the end of making Around the Sun, it finally got through my thick skull that I had absolutely no idea what the hell I was doing. Nonetheless, instead of trying to dive into learning music, I figured that while the sound I'd created for myself was less than pleasant, it was indisputably mine. Having said that, I knew I was going to have to eventually learn some degree of allegedly proper music, so I decided to have one last hurrah of naivete. On the one hand, I felt like I'd bitten off more than I could chew with Around the Sun, but at the same time, I was still so utterly enthralled with my Fostex 4 tracker that I wanted to continue exploring the possibilities of it. Read, I wanted to make an album where all the tracks segued into each other. Well, save for that spot where you'd have to turn the record or tape over. Anyway, the end compromise was to make a decidedly little concept album about a guy, read me, and his small army of overdubbed clones just wandering around the house and bashing out a few tunes, with a few random bits of nonsense between songs. Of course, this being me, there was a catch. I'd come to the conclusion that it was time to fully embrace my position as vocalist, stemming from this weird notion that instrumental pieces equaled filler. This meant no instrumentals this time out, and needlessly pushing my dreadful vocals to punishingly loud levels. As of the making of this album, I had yet to quite grasp the notion of maintenance. As such, over the 4+ months I spent making this album, plus the prior 9 weeks of making Around the Sun, I never so much as cleaned the heads on the old 4-tracker. The sound, which was terrible in the first place, gets progressively worse over the course of the album. Add to that the jagged tone of my voice and instruments, and well, you might want to pause this video for a little preemptive aspirin break. Getting back to the whole back to basics thing, I figured the album needed to start with a good dose of fast, short and sweet, no BS, simple rock and roll. In mono, no less. This song was effectively my mashup of Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son and Travelin' Band.
Would you like to throw your banner in my face or put me in my place? Would you like to fall from grace and join the human race? Well, I looked into the sky to be saved and looked in the sea for my grave. I went to the mountains too high, but you were already inside. Was it because I lied or did you hope I would die?
Despite my penchant for innuendo, which I hadn't developed yet, I assure you that this song was 100% innocent. This was intended as a light, carefree ode to the joys of rock and roll, featuring nothing but electric guitars. Plug It In was intended literally. It meant to plug in an electric guitar. You don't believe me one bit, do you?
You can be the leader, but we all are. You can pick up the guitar and play light or hard, but you gotta plug it in. It's not a sin, you just gotta plug it in.
This was my first ever attempt at a ballad. I have no idea what I was trying to convey with this one. It seems to be about getting a little too into an old film, silent, of course. Yet at the same time, the narrative keeps shifting from past to present and from personal to observational. And yes, that is the sound of my old Keystone 8mm projector on this one. You know, the one I destroyed making the Telescene episode.
Another movie flickering on my wall. The picture reflecting in the hall. The sight and the smell, I remember well, I remember well.
From the slapstick of Buster Keaton to the directorial genius of D.W. Griffith.
Here we go with the silent film thing again. During this time, VHS was on its way out the door. For me, this meant picking up a lot of would-be $20 to $40 silent movie tapes on closeout for $5 to $8 a piece. One of those movies was D.W. Griffith's 1918 film Hearts of the World. At one point in the movie, one of the title cards reads something to the effect of, "If you can't get what you want what you can get." So I wrote a silly, deliberately self-contradictory Bob Dylan kind of lyric and paired it up with, effectively, You Gotta Plug It In Part 2. No intended innuendo here either.
If you can't get what you want, then want what you can get. And if you can't get that, then try again. If it's not gonna happen, then it hasn't happened yet. If you keep thinking that you're gonna get wet, if it is not fresh, then it is stale. If you're finished, then let me tell you another fairy tale. If you think I'm being cute, then you need to be locked up in a rubber suit. If you can't make a sound, it's because I took your flute.
And that annoyingly pervasive Jackson Browne influence starts rearing its ugly head again. And in one fell swoop, I totally killed this album's pacing with an unnecessary 6-minute track. Oh yeah, and I just discovered Jeff Beck, and was doing my darndest to impersonate him. On the guitar, that is.
I've been standing, watching life from the sideline. No matter how far I run, no matter how well I hide, I can't escape feeling that I'm standing right next to where I wanna be.
Getting things back on track with this one, this song was a bit prophetic in retrospect. It's about being torn between an attachment to the past and the desire to keep moving forward. Little did I know. As a little amusing aside, then and now, every time I deliver the song's title, I think it sounds like I'm saying "my old ways," which kinda sounds like a cheap brand of salsa.
My old ways, I can't quit. My old ways, I can't change, but can stay the same. I can't change my old ways. The good old days are gone, now it's time to move on. I can't quit my old ways.
Yeah, I had already heard the Beatles tune by this point, but that didn't stop me from stealing its title. This is the big embarrassment of this album. I had this grand notion of a massive, but still fairly short, ultra-dramatic ballad. I'm not really sure what this song is supposed to be about. The best I can gather is that it's about an imagined apocalypse. But most likely I just threw a bunch of Jackson Browne lyrics into the metaphorical blender. Hey, at least one of those Jackson Browne lyrics gave me the album's title.
I lie awake awake and watch the trees bend from a merciless wind. I hear it blow through my open door and shake my fallen window. I still see them, but I would never be them. And when the sand sifted through the cracks and the ceiling caved in.
Once more into the silence. In Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush, at one point early in the film, the little tramp encounters a sign that reads, "Here lies Jim Sourdough, on this spot, got lost in the snow." This spawned another little nod to Bob Dylan. Of course, Dylan's lyrics, as outrageous as they could get, always seem to be, about something. My words were effectively a barrage of silly, random imagery. The music was my attempt at rockabilly, which came out far closer to psychobilly, which I'd never heard of yet. As for the title, Blind Man's Pass was supposed to be the mountain pass where poor old Jim Sourdough got lost in the snow. Also, as an early bit of self-reference, I ended the track with a bit of a real recording of my 9-year-old self cheering myself on.
Jim Sourdough, he got lost in the snow. Where he's buried, you'll never know. But it's alright, he just let it go.
Here comes the Jackson Browne again. This is the album's other out-of-place long song. And while the lyrics never quite plummet to the depths of "I sold my soul to the man in my hole," it's still home to some of my all-time dumbest lyrics.
They say we'll run out of energy soon. They say there will be hotels on the moon. We'll do our living in our month of June. Will they still be rushing when we've accomplished all we can? What will we do?
Like Reflection and Alter Persona on Silence is Golden, this is really one song split into 2 tracks, because segues. Anyway, I'd been listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival's Willie and the Poor Boys nearly non-stop during this stretch of time. Effigy was my favorite cut on that record, and it heavily influenced this track. Having said that, I think the title was just a placeholder, and I just never got around to giving it a proper title. In other words, this song has nothing to do with effigies, nor are they ever mentioned. As for Resonance, I think I meant to call it something to the effect of Response, because it was effectively a rebuttal to the effigy half of the song. I think. Actually, I have absolutely no idea what I was on about here.
Where were you when it stopped and I had to carry on my own? When you left me and I was to carry the stone. It grabbed me lightly, but I never would have known. When I saw both your eyes and the setting of the rising sun, it stoned me lightly, but it hasn't shown. But you wouldn't know, you wouldn't let it show. Gotta go, gotta let you know that I'm alright. Stayed up all night, standing here by the highway side, watching the car go by. I never should have had to try so hard to figure out what I already know.
I might upset a few folks with this one, but I wrote this song on 9/11. Not that writing a song on 9/11 was magically offensive, mind you, but here's the deal. Once the initial shock of the events of that day passed, my mind started drifting towards those people that you knew were going to try and profit off of it, be it the media or people making and selling cheap commemorative merchandise or what have you. But you didn't dare admit a thought like that at that time. I'm pretty sure this is the single most cynical song ever written by a 15-year-old kid. Yeah, I was a grouchy old man back then, too.
Hollywood had a film deal waiting, and the TV men went into shock for good ratings. Jesus knows this just isn't our day.
I couldn't just end this album with the crescendo that concluded Pandemonium. One of the albums that I was hooked on at this time was Harry Nilsson's Son of Schmilsson. The first cut on that album ended with a little comedy sketch in which a napping Nilsson woke up to a bunch of cheesy horror movie sound effects, most of which just magically involved his own voice. So I created a little homage to this sketch by making another one of my now signature nightmarish sound collages, and just like on the Nilsson track, capped it off with a couple of lines of self-exchanged dialogue.
Hey, what the? What's going on here?
Silence!
Hey, who said that? Man, this isn't funny. Where'd you get all the sound effects from?
I made them.
Fallen Windows marked the first time that I sorta designed my own artwork. Even though the phrase fallen windows doesn't make any sense, I still had the mental image of something that might cause a window to fall out of its frame. So the idea was that somehow magically, an iceberg ran into the side of a building, or vice versa. When you opened up the CD, you'd see the iceberg on its own, i.e. the thing that caused the window or wall to fall. Of course, this would have been a lot more effective if it weren't for that pesky hole in the middle of the CD. Yes, Fallen Windows did get released at the time on the old mp3.com site, and it was available as a download and an on-demand CDR made by mp3.com. And this was actually my big hit, if you will, of the period. It sold a whopping 3 copies. And amazingly, all 3 of those copies were of those CDRs. And I didn't know anybody personally that bought one because I'd get a name whenever it would sell one, and I never knew who they were. But having said that, I never did get to hear what those discs were like or see what they were like, so if by some freak occurrence you've got a line on one of those 3, please let me know. But I'm pretty sure they're all in landfills now. But anyway, moving on, I was pretty proud of Fallen Windows at the time. So much so that I pretty actively promoted it on the mp3.com forums and some other online musicians forums. And I probably oversold it a bit because I wound up facing a bit of a backlash. So all the way into mid 2003, so almost 2 years after this record came out, and after I'd pulled it from print, I was getting periodic death threats over it, and also at the same time, occasionally getting these, in retrospect, rather amusingly neat, bullet pointed lists of instructions on ways to kill myself as slowly and painfully as possible. But, and of course, whenever I would try and respond to the emails or report them, they were always fakes. But, as you could well imagine, this totally shattered my self-confidence at the time. And I had been trying to start learning proper music, but I stopped caring. And, of course, the raging teenage hormones were going on at the same time. And I did go back to work. I did start work on the next record, but it just wasn't there. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of gloss over this one. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the worst thing I have ever done in any medium. And this is actually my candidate for the worst album of all time. But anyway, this one's called Anything Can Happen. Sometime around or just after my 16th birthday, I got a Tascam Porta 2 4-track cassette multi-tracker, plus an Audio-Technica ST95 dynamic mic, and a head cleaning kit. Despite the improved recording equipment, I'd pretty well lost interest in continuing to explore the possibilities of a 4-tracker. Nonetheless, I started writing songs again, but whereas Fallen Windows was largely a 4-month party, Anything Can Happen became a year-long hangover of cynical, suicidal dirges. Worse yet, despite some attempts at learning proper chords and stuff, I couldn't be bothered to work on how to make instruments work together as opposed to against each other. And worse yet, my vocals were the most flat, monotone, and droning of my life. And that's saying something. And I was still on my mandatory lyrics kick. Amazingly, given my mindset at the time, the album title was intended to be ironic. Reed, I was feeling pretty hopeless at the time. For what it's worth, that front cover has nothing to do with anything. Also, the album's one and only bit of humor appeared on the back cover, which was admittedly just an image swiped from the internet. The back cover featured a picture of a stereotypically beautiful young couple having a romantic date on the beach. Reed, it was an allusion to cheap potential sex. You know, anything can happen. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Pretty much the only attempt I made at upping my game on the techie front on this one came by way of trying to sync up my old Fostex with the new Tascam deck, held together by a pair of piggyback cables. Problem was, the Fostex ran a tad slow and maxed out at about 2/3 the volume level of the Tascam. Nonetheless, I tried a few times to give myself 8-track recording capability. The results are every bit as woozy as you'd expect.
Feeling of inner peace is so hard to find, like that feeling of self-confidence left long ago in the back of your
Well, you can't say that I completely stopped exploring different musical styles during this period. If anything, they got a little stranger. Chief example, right around my 16th birthday, I purchased a copy of Frank Sinatra's Greatest Hits. For whatever reason, I got it into my head that I needed to try and write some of the more spare, desolate torch ballads that Sinatra periodically tackled. Funnily enough, my attempt at the style sounded more like a bizarre mishmash of church music, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and 70s navel-gazing singer-songwriters.
Got no place left to hide. Now I've got to look for a place inside of myself. Well, here I am, but I don't know where I'm at. Wherever I am, it's time now to make a final stand. How could you leave me left behind, and I'm sitting in the gutter?
Looking back on it, the fixation I developed on the subject of isolation back on Around the Sun really came to a head here. Not to mention a new parallel fixation on finality. Then there was that weird habit of trying to write from life experience that I hadn't accrued yet.
If you're thinking of taking a look back and you're trying to find your innocent past, tell your dancing daughters about the pain and black. Look inside into the future to make your sweet memories last, because you know you can never go back. Grab a plane first thing in the morning. Sun came up, didn't give any warning. Kept on thinking about what life remains. Giving up trying 'cause my luck won't change. I don't know what happens when the fuse burns out. No bombs go off, nothing ever comes out. Maybe farther on down the line I'll find what life is about. One more river to cross is one too many, but there still is a long way to go. All things have to come to an end, and I know more than I want to know, but I still need to remember all wounds must mend before happiness can grow. Standing alone here in the sand, in the dim morning sun, here I stand at the edge of this land, hearing the water calling me closer. I can almost feel the hot winds blow. Nothing matters anymore, no.
I dutifully released Anything Can Happen on, once again, mp3.com at the beginning of December of 2002, and it sold exactly one copy. Lord have mercy on that poor soul. But anyway, to close things out today, I want to jump back in time a bit here. So over the end credits here, I'm going to play a bit of my attempt at a Christmas single that I did during this period. And this did get released. It was a free download, and I put it out just in time for the 2001 holiday season. And I actually made this when I was still working on Fallen Windows, like in September or October. And even though I was very much trying to prove my rocker and singer metal with Fallen Windows, I was starting to miss the instrumental stuff again, and the pompous, pretentious, progressive streak was starting to come around again, so I put Fallen Windows on hold for a while, and I went to work on this big, long instrumental suite, 16 minutes plus, and it was a mishmash of very well-trodden classical holiday tunes like Angels We Have Heard on High, and there were a few originals in there as well. Now, I couldn't read music back then, and I couldn't pick anything out by ear to save my life, so I really could have just stripped the names and credits off of this thing and called it one big, long, droning original, but whatever. Anyway, the final product was called the Christmas Waltz Suite. Despite the fact that I didn't know what a waltz was back then, I just knew it had something to do with music and that it sounded classy. And also, none of it is in 3/4 time, at least not on purpose. And I was also blissfully unaware back then that there had been a tune in the 50s called the Christmas Waltz. So, 3 strikes there. But anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I finally find myself back in ratings rehab because I had the gall to make another one of these episodes.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Never mind.
And welcome to a special ratings-killing edition of the Oddity Archive. I just never know when to quit, do I? Well, assuming you watch these things as they're released, you've had yourself a good 8 months or so to recover from the twin towers of torture that were Fallen Windows and Anything Can Happen. I promise, it finally starts resembling so-called correct music this time around. But best of all, I get to finally prove in this chapter that I'm not a complete shut-in, with tinfoil on the windows and mason jars full of my own toenail clippings. I don't do that. I promise. Admittedly, I've been holding back one bit of my story on you lovely folks. From 2001 to 2003, I was one half of a teenage folk rock duo called Ben and Brendan. Or is it Brendan and Ben? I'm not going to dwell on this too long, largely because A, we haven't spoken in well over a decade, and B, I don't think Brendan looks back on this period too fondly. Anyway, Brendan, last name withheld, was a childhood friend who lived across the street from me. Even after his family moved away across town, we stayed in touch and started seeing each other again as teenagers. Now, around the time Silence is Golden was brewing in my head, I started trying to get Brendan interested in music. And it worked beautifully. Initially, neither of us knew what we were doing, and our collaborations were akin to the train wrecks that littered my solo stuff. However, during the time in which we were both starting to figure out so-called proper music, we developed a short-lived working relationship in which one of us would write the lyrics and the other would write the music. The general performance structure of Ben and Brendan was as follows. Brendan handled lead vocals, which didn't break my heart, and rhythm guitar. I handled lead guitar and the occasional backing vocal. Any additional instrumentation was overdubbed by whoever was up to the task that day. During the 2+ years that we were sorta active, we wrote and recorded about an EP's worth of material, none of which was ever released.
Down to the impossible way. There will always be another day, another month, another year, another tear. For the way things are going, it hits you without you knowing. The light will shine its sun to you.
I guess you could say it was the stereotypical creative differences that led to the demise of Ben and Brendan. Brendan and Ben, take your pick. Now, around this time, it was roughly the commercial peak of what Todd in the Shadows so aptly refers to as wigwag music. White guy with acoustic guitar. Read the artificially laid-back guys like John Mayer and Jack Johnson, both of whom I hated. Read Brendan wanted to emulate those guys specifically and get all the girls and money. I, of course, being the hard-headed artiste, wanted to continue the more exploratory path that I was already heading down. While I held out hope that things would work themselves out, the writing was on the wall. Our last recording was done in November of 2003. My revised arrangement of a song we'd already recorded that summer, which this time Brendan only grudgingly participated in.
Heard of it live from me about 1,000,000 times before. My bags are packed, the car is waiting for me. I'm bound for glory, I'm on my way, come hell or high water.
After finishing the monumentally depressing Anything Can Happen at the beginning of December of 2002, I was very much ready for a fresh start. Before the year was out, I was back to writing and recording songs. At this point, all I wanted to do was to continue learning so-called proper music and to try and write better songs. As such, for the first time ever, there was no concept, no mandatory lyrics, and no forced genre exercises. Over the first 3 months of 2003, I half-heartedly issued a trio of singles online. And Around the Sun-styled train wreck. I have no idea why I released this one.
Go away, don't wanna see you anymore. Go away, don't want your lies anymore. start a new day, and I don't want to waste my time anymore. Don't want your rise anymore, and I don't want your time anymore.
If I wasn't railing against John Mayer, I was railing against teen pop idols like Britney Spears. Though I'd never heard any of Stan Freberg's classic pop parody/comedy sketch hybrids yet, that's exactly the style I stumbled upon here. The idea behind You Turn Me On Like a Light Bulb was to expose all those awful and artistically inferior musical posers for the frauds that they really were. I executed this concept via a mock recording session for a Britney Spears-esque pop idol, before all the processing that made such artists sound considerably less like Benny Boy just doing a bad falsetto. Of course, the punchline is that her sheer awfulness made all the equipment spaz out and caused the recording session to come to a premature and abrupt end.
Yeah, baby, you know it makes me horny when you call me baby, baby.
Beautiful.
Well, I guess I'll just have to play hard to get.
Hey, where's the app?
Baby, I looked at your face, but I love you anyway. Yeah, I love you, baby, although sometimes I eat too much. Yeah, when you hold me, baby, almost in my life. Cola companies on the phone. Hey, what the?
Hey, come on. Come on.
What's going on? Amazingly, this song hit number 1 on some website I posted the track to. Alas, I don't remember the name. Unfortunately, this site didn't let you sell copies, if you will, of your songs, meaning that I finally had a kind of viral hit that I couldn't cash in on. Funnily enough, I was later sent a cover version of my song by a presumptive group called Bone Monkey. No idea if it's the same one that comes up in the Google search.
Baby, you know it makes me horny when you call me baby. I guess I have to play hard to get. Yeah, I love you, baby, and although I eat too much, sometimes my lunch.
Well, there was already about 1 million songs out there by this title. Didn't stop me from writing my own, though. Honestly, I don't remember much about this one, except that it was my little stab at psychedelic pop.
Won't you meet me dancing on the water? Won't you meet me flying in the sky? The clock hands are sticking straight up, and I do believe it is high time.
If you've ever looked around my Bandcamp page, benminot.bandcamp.com, you've probably seen an operative term EP by the name of West of Elderbush Gulch. West of Elderbush Gulch was originally my 5th full-length LP, which I, in retrospect, rightly chickened out on releasing. Let's get to it. Sometime in early 2003, I became mildly obsessed with the idea that, allegedly, lightning never strikes twice in the same place. This became the working title to my thoroughly undefined eventual new album. I even went as far as rough drafting an idea for an album cover. Had I been able to get away with it, the final cover would have been me, in silhouette, leaning up against the remains of a tree that had just been struck by lightning. I'm sure there's a metaphor in there somewhere. On the musical front, October 30th, 2003 proved to be one hell of a day. I had recently been to the original Twist and Shout, underground as it was known, in Denver and had raided the vinyl bargain bin. I bought a whole stack of albums, each for no more than $1 a piece. That day, I placed 3 of those albums on my turntable for the first time and experienced an awakening. Those albums were Todd Rundgren's Hermit of Mink Hollow, Linda Ronstadt's Silk Purse, and Laura Nero's New York Tendaberry. In one fell swoop, these albums made me finally realize that it was okay to be quirky, eclectic, and dynamic. I don't think it was any accident that this was also the day I completed work on my first usable new song. In all reality, the only thing that changed in my life since anything can happen was that I was now in a downright shaky relationship with a girl I went to school with. I won't go into detail. I'll just say that she wasn't exactly faithful. Like so many before me, this proved to be a frustration in real life and a gift in the creative life. This song was me ruminating on this failing relationship, and probably, in part, subconsciously about the imminent demise of Ben and Brendan.
Did I see you again yesterday? Will I see you again today? And if you look at my face and you take me by your hand, will you tell me just where I stand? And I wanna make you turn around. I wanna know that I was right. And who is being the fool? Who's gonna make it all right?
One of the few things I'd yet to attempt by this point was a big love ballad. Probably because I'm not much of a ladies' man. Nonetheless, I set out to come up with the grandest, most lush ballad I could pull off within my means. It's just a shame the lyrics didn't seem to add up to anything. And shame I wasn't up to the task vocally. I should also note that this was the point at which I started trying to periodically add things like reverb onto my recordings. The Tascam Porta 2 I was using had no onboard effects. As such, whenever I wanted any kind of effect, I wound up recording the parts wet, as it's known, by running a microphone through my guitar amp with whatever effect I wanted, usually via a Boss DD5 delay pedal.
Nothing but time.
Back in Volume 1, I discussed a track called The Battle of Elderbush Gulch from Silence is Golden. For reasons that I've long since forgotten, I revisited a bit of that track in which it sounded like I was trying in vain to play the intro to the Eagles' Tequila Sunrise. For whatever reason, it inspired me to make Elderbush Gulch a recurring, if fictitious, place in my work. And yes, this is what caused me to drop the working Lightning Never Strikes Twice title. Anyway, the initial plan was for this to be a Ventures, Shadows, sorta twangy rock instrumental. When I demoed the song, I just wanted to quickly get the idea down, so I did it acoustically. It worked so well that I scrapped the electric idea and did it as a folk piece. And yes, longtime viewers have heard this one used in about 1 million repair montages. And here's the 3 big reasons why this album didn't get released. All 3 of these songs were attempts at writing songs that would hopefully have a shot at being recorded by other artists. They stink, and the music's a train wreck. Ick, ick, and ick.
The line that separates me from you, and I can't help but feeling, but I can't help but feeling that I'm being used. And I can't help but feeling, but I can't help but feeling that it's all through. Love is so wonderful when it's new, but sometimes it just don't pull through. But this time, babe, it's gonna be different. I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. Well, if it's not love, I'll be the one to let you go. And if it's not love, I'll be the one to let you know. And I know things could always go on this way. We all have to accept the change, but we can't go on when things are changing once again.
Apologies in advance, this one's got a long story tied to it. This song had already been kicking around for a while prior to recording it, partially because I didn't know what to do with it. I initially wanted this to be kind of a Tom Petty, Heartland rock sort of thing. Problem is, the song doesn't really follow any kind of structure. It just kind of happens. Something that's not really conducive to Heartland rock. As I was trying to figure out what to do with the song, I got drafted into my high school's jazz band. No, really. They needed a guitar player, and I was about as close to a gunslinger as the school had, and there I was. I only lasted for about a month before I split, during which time I usually just ditched our performances. Officially, I left to take an internship at the Denver Center of Performing Arts, which was true, but I mostly left because it cut into my own writing and recording time. That and my aforementioned girlfriend was also in the band, during which time I met my, shall we say, replacement. I'm always the last to know. Anyway, during this time, we somehow made the Colorado State Finals, which we lost. Big time. Upon learning that we were heading to the magic wonderland of Alamosa, Colorado for the state finals, my mission became clear. The opening line to Lightning Never Strikes Twice was, I was sitting all alone in a hotel room. Yeah, I needed to cut this sucker in a hotel room, which I did on Friday, February 6th, 2004. Despite the cramped vehicles, I was able to sneak in with my clothes, my Tascam, my Audio-Technica ST95 mic, a collapsible mic stand, and an XLR cable. I also took along my acoustic guitar, claiming it was necessary for rehearsal. That night, as my roommates, and really the entire band, minus myself, took a late-night swim in the hotel pool, I stayed in the room and quickly cut my song, rhythm guitar and vocal live, and overdubbed lead guitar, all in one take each. I also, realizing that the right channel was kinda empty, decided to poke my microphone out the sliding glass door of the room and record 3 minutes worth of my bandmates wreaking havoc in the pool, which was just outside the door. I finished just in time for them to come back. By Monday morning, the song was mixed and in the can.
I'm sitting all alone in a hotel room, right next door to the ice machine. I've been thinking about an old tune, about a rock and roll queen. But now I'm out on the road alone, singing all about how she'd be so nice. But deep in my heart I know lightning never strikes twice.
No relation to the Dan Fogelberg song. This was just another one of those, please cover my song sorta deals.
And whenever you need somebody, you can always come to me. Maybe someday I'll come to you. You know that I won't run from you. And whenever you need somebody, you can always count on me.
Well, it wouldn't be a music career episode without another silent film thing. The big difference with this one was I was now 18 years old, and as such, finally able to participate in the Turner Classic Movies Young Film Composers Competition. I didn't make it past the initial round. The film du jour for 2004 was the 1926 Greta Garbo vehicle, The Temptress. The scene is the one in which Garbo's character first arrives in Argentina. The hotel I'd stayed at during the whole jazz band fiasco was called the Inn of the Rio Grande, which to my utter shock still exists. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I at least started writing the lyrics on that trip. And I think I can safely say this was the point where I started developing a certain angst towards the whole music thing. Also, immediately following my arrival back home from that trip, I once again ran off to Twist and Shout, where I picked up a copy of the Flying Burrito Brothers' Gilded Palace of Sin, which I immediately fell in love with. I figured that if Sneaky Pete Kleino could do fuzz tone pedal steel guitar, I could do fuzz tone mandolin. Did I mention I'd gotten a mandolin and banjo for Christmas of 2003?
And tonight falls at the Rio Grande, and you wanna hold the world in your hands, but you can't go back from where you came, and nobody hears you when you scream.
One other bit of fallout from the jazz band thing was, when I was unceremoniously dumped, I wrote a heartfelt, if rather drippy, I love you and I miss you and I always will song to my ex.
When all of your friends have gone home to their boxes, these open arms will still be waiting, waiting. And when you finished playing your part, this broken heart will still be waiting, waiting.
Even though I was too young to really grasp it at the time, for whatever reason, I really connected to John Hyatt's Bring the Family album. Hyatt had recently kicked his alcoholism, gotten, I think, remarried, and embraced fatherhood, and his songs reflected a very real, hard-won wisdom. I got it into my 18-year-old head that I'd just been through the ringer myself and tried to write something like one of those songs. Coupled with my looming high school graduation, I guess it seemed like a nice farewell. Having said that, I don't particularly like this one. I think it's kind of boring.
There's a life that I've been living, always trying to pull through, and I see myself in this cracked review. Mirror don't always show what's true, and here comes the morning when we're off to chase our vision of paradise.
Another one I've since repurposed as montage music for the archive. This was inspired by the band's theme from The Last Waltz. I wrote a very simple, folky melody and separated it by periods of improvised mandolin and banjo. And that's about it. As soon as I came up with the basic tune, I knew it had to be the last song on the album. And just to hammer the point home, I decided to keep the tape rolling after I finished each individual track while I put aside my instruments and started packing up. Okay, one more Alamosa story. On that fateful trip, I took my Polaroid and a pack of film with me, which I failed to use in Alamosa. On the way home, we stopped for a bit at a truck stop just outside of Walsenburg, Colorado. I decided to stay in the van. I just wanted some peace. As everyone else was making a nuisance of themselves in the convenience store, I looked out the van window and saw the Rocky Mountains, lovely as ever, out in the distance, with a whole lot of ugly, dirty crap in the foreground. It hit me that this was Elderbush Gulch, an ugly little dump with beauty just out of reach. I quickly dug out my camera and shot off the entire pack of film. One of those shots, of course, became the heart of the album cover, which became an intentionally underwhelming picture postcard. I completed West of Elderbush Gulch on May 15th, 2004, 2 weeks to the day before I graduated from high school. Now, I already knew I was going to be heading off to college in the fall, and I knew I was going to be doing something music related there, and I knew that the stakes were probably going to be just a teeny bit higher than they had been. And I just took one look at my hissy, clunky little homemade record and decided to shelve it. And as it turned out, my fears were not unfounded at all. So let me put it this way. My first semester of college, I had a classmate who got a record deal with Epic Records for his band. And that band was called The Fray. And pretty soon they had a few hits, and a couple of really big ones. And they were not the only soon-to-be famous ones that I was going to school with. So, yeah, I decided to just quietly bury West of Elderbush Gulch. Temporarily, anyway. But that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when, like all good rocker dudes, I get carted off to rehab. In my case, ratings rehab. Because I'm not cool enough for real rehab.
You turn me on like a light bulb.
And welcome to another chapter of God, doesn't this idiot know when to quit? Better known as Ben's music career. Almost made it a whole year without doing another episode. But anyway, today's episode marks the big change. It marks my move out of the bedroom and away from the old cassette 4-tracker and into working with other people and going into the studio for the first time. It's a comedy or tragedy of epic proportions. Actually, I'm still not too sure myself. This is kind of where I learned that it can be a real fine line between comedy and tragedy. But with that, today let's take a look at my first properly released album, Pressed and Everything. Greetings from Elderbush Gulch. I graduated from high school at the end of May of 2004, and I was exhausted. Over the course of my senior year, I'd watched my high school romance burn out, watched Ben and Brendan collapse, been drafted into, and soon went AWOL from the school quote-unquote jazz band, worked an internship, worked my first so-called real job, and wrote and recorded West of Elderbush Gulch, which I opted to not release. I knew I was going to be starting college in about 3 months. I knew I would eventually want to start on another album, but really had no immediate plans. So, whereas a sane kid would have done something constructive, I spent that summer reading a lot of mostly non-fiction books from the local library, and listening to whatever new, to me, music I could get my hands on. Then, almost abruptly, it was time for school.
Campus, part of lower downtown. And the 21st century brought another significant new beginning.
I started at the University of Colorado at Denver, henceforth UCD, in late August of 2004 as a music industry studies student, which was a mishmash of performance, production, and business classes, and of which you could pick an emphasis. Not wanting to look like a complete loser to my parents, I opted to go with the business emphasis, even if it was the least of my interests. Anyway, I managed to unwittingly step into a near-perfect storm of far more experienced and accomplished musicians, songwriters, and so-called serious composers, a few of which would soon achieve varying levels of fame. Among them were 2 members of The Fray, the How to Save a Life group, one of whom damn near became my bass player. Also, Esme Patterson, at least 2 members of Mies, who were briefly signed to Atlantic, and Gustavo Input d'Arthenay. Among the crowd outside of school were Devachka, Nate, or Nathaniel Rateliff, Tickle Me Elmo, or Tickle Me Pink, and 303. As you could well imagine, this was a tad intimidating. But I knew I wanted to get in on this whole music thing, so I assessed the situation, and I came to the following conclusions. 1, UCD, and really the Denver music scene in general, was loaded with folky singer-songwriter types. This was certainly nothing new to me, so I decided to focus my energies on being a good little singer-songwriter. 2, I'd been on stage a few times by this point, but never as the center of attention, so I started doing the whole coffee house open mic thing to try and develop some kind of stage presence. And 3, if I was going to join the elite group of rising stars, I needed some kind of product to sell. I knew West of Elderbush Gulch wasn't going to cut it, so I needed to start work on a new project. Read another album. On a somewhat contradictory note, I should note here that during the first semester of school, I briefly came to the conclusion that maybe I should try and get Ben and Brendan back together. That way there'd be 2 songwriters to reckon with, one of whom was better looking and had a better singing voice than yours truly. In December of 2004, I tried one last time to get the old duo back together. He wasn't interested. So, in one fell swoop, just before Christmas of 2004, I found myself facing the reality that if I had any future at all in music, it was as a solo artist. Up until this point, I'd been a 100% hermetic lo fi creature of the cassette, which was not a cool thing to be at the time. But honestly, I was pretty sick of it. I was tired of the technical limitations. I was tired of trying to work around my parents. I was tired of trying to fake my way through instruments I didn't normally play, like the drums. I was tired of not having real drums on my recordings. I'd never had any bass at all due to track limitations. Bottom line, I wanted to get into a real studio and I wanted some hired guns on hand. So I spent most of 2005 working odd jobs, selling off parts of my collections and some of my gear, and just all around squirreling money away. Oh, yeah, and writing songs. Lots and lots of songs. By around September, I was starting to try and wrangle together a bassist and drummer to back me on the album. I would still handle guitars and keyboards. I was also starting to look around for project studios to work at. So around October or maybe early November, I thought I had everything together. Then everyone flaked out on me, and the studio went belly up. I probably should have taken it as a sign. Of course, slightly demented kid that I was, all it did was piss me off into redoubling my efforts. Having said that, after this, things go a bit hazy to me. But I believe around New Year's I got everything worked out. I'd pinned down a bassist and 2 drummers in case one flaked out. Now, I do remember this much. The bassist also had a rehearsal space and a Yamaha 16-track digital workstation, so we could record as we went along, saving me some major studio costs in the process. The basic tracks were to be worked on for 2 days, ostensibly one for rehearsal and one for recording. The sessions were to begin on Friday, January 27th, 2006. The recording of Greetings was easily my worst experience as a recording artist. I'll try not to blab too long about this. Yeah, famous last words. Anyway, under circumstances that I was never privy to, the aforementioned bassist, I think, rented out the basement of the now long defunct Rock and Rose Art Gallery in downtown Longmont, Colorado. In this claustrophobic, acoustically deficient basement was an ancient drum kit, the aforementioned Yamaha workstation, a stolen grocery store cart full of old rock LPs, but alas, no turntable, and lots of dog hair all over the place. Anyway, I thought I had it all planned out. I even saved a little extra so I could stay in a hotel a few minutes away from the gallery, so I wouldn't have to make the 75-minute commute to and from beautiful downtown Aurora. That first day, the bassist and I rehearsed a bit, and that was it. Both potential drummers were MIA. The next day, our drummers were both no-shows again. I wound up shelling out for another night at the hotel, just in case things could get going again that night. On Sunday, we finally got our first drummer in, who refused to rehearse. We just had to roll tape and hope for the best. Now, I had 9 songs I wanted to have my rhythm section on. We got through 5 before the drummer's gout made it too painful to play anymore. Yeah, my musicians were a little older than me. Thankfully, the second drummer was finally available, so we brought him in, and I actually liked him a good bit better, but he was a slow learner compared to the first. We barely got through 2 more songs. As a last-ditch effort, the bassist wound up jumping behind the kit for one more song. I probably could have done a better job, and I had yet to sit behind a full kit, ever. Song number 9 was immediately reconceived as an acoustic number I could do during the, as yet unscheduled, overdub sessions. Once the basic tracking sessions ended, all I needed were the multi-tracks to take back with me. The CD burner in the workstation seemed to be working ultra slow, which actually turned out to be the perfect storm of cheap, crappy CDs and operator error. Regardless, I agreed I'd return in a day or 2 or 3 to pick up the discs. A week or 2 later, after never getting a hold of the bassist, I returned to Longmont to at least confront him about it. No luck. After a total of 5 weeks and a lot of nagging, I finally got a set of CDs from the bassist, which, shock of shocks, wouldn't read. About a week later, a mutual engineer acquaintance who happened to periodically hang out in that basement went to bat for me. As related to me soon after, he borrowed, without asking, the workstation, harvested my tracks, loosely organized them, burned them to CD, and mailed them to me. I'm taking it on faith that he, returned the workstation. Anyway, once he got involved, what had taken the bassist 5 weeks to do wrong took the acquaintance about 5 days to do right, and mail to me, and hold in my hands. To this day, I'm convinced that if not for him, I would have never seen the multi-tracks from that session. Despite the efforts to at least organize the multi-tracks, they were still in absolute shambles. Some tracks were out of sync, some clipped like crazy, others had hardly any level at all, and on at least one occasion, the bass track, which was recorded direct in, was just a wash of low-pitched feedback. The performances were less than stellar. Given the lack of rehearsal, my guitar was leading the charge throughout, instead of the drummer. I played the simplest, most obvious rhythms I could just to keep everyone in line. It didn't really work. Despite this, I figured that with a little cleanup and a truckload of overdubs, the project would be salvageable. The nearest open block of days at my project studio of choice was still a couple of weeks out, but I took the first block of days I could get. I wanted the album done so bad that I didn't care what those days were, and I just stopped going to school for a few days once I could get in. Anyway, it was this little $20 an hour joint in lower downtown Denver, aka Lodo, called imaginatively Studio Lodo, just as that part of Lodo was starting to really get gentrified. I booked 4 days to do about 24 overdubs, record 2 songs from scratch, and mix the record. No sweat. Studio Lodo was this odd 2-story open loft with a small recording booth on the lower level and a small bedroom on the upper level where the proprietor lived. He was this enigmatic young audio engineer named Jerome, who looked like the archetypical LL Bean male model. He fell off the face of the planet before the album came out. Anyway, Jerome was a decent, if somewhat inexperienced engineer, and he actually wound up singing backup on a couple songs. Aside from a couple of problematic overdubs, the whole process went off more or less according to plan. 2.5 days of overdubs and new recordings, a day and a half of mixing, and a few stolen hours a few days later to polish it a bit. The mastering was done somewhere else down the line. As of April 22nd, 2006, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch was finally finished. I'll discuss it more later, but I was never happy with the original mix or Loudness Wars informed master of this album. I went back and remixed and remastered it in 2011, which came out far closer to my original intent. Unless noted otherwise, all song clips are from the 2011 remix. This was the only Ben and Brendan song I bothered to carry forward with me. At the time of writing, June 2003, it was intended as a statement of purpose. Since the purpose hadn't really changed, it seemed only just to bring it along as the bridge between the bedroom era stuff and my hopeful ascent to the big leagues.
Heard every line from me about 1,000,000 times before. My bags are packed, the car is waiting for me. Bound for glory, said I'm on my way, come hell or high water.
This was the first significant Ben Minn-Knot brand cynical rant. I remember I wanted the song to be a dynamic affair, starting with a lonely, quiet acoustic guitar, with a slightly startling band entrance, increasing intensity, a slight tempo increase toward the end, and a rather rude return to just the acoustic for the final chord, which intentionally resolved to not the tonic chord. Of course, there was no place in the basic tracking sessions for such frivolities. At best, I managed about half of what I intended to with this one. Also, this is one of 2 songs from the album that I made a music video for. This one being an affectionate parody of the video for the Replacements' Bastards of Young, minus the unfortunate ending.
I could tell you 1,000 lies, I might take an inch up the wood, try. Well, where's my lady with the night black hair? I know she's gotta be around here somewhere, well. I could tell you 1,000 lies, I might take an inch of it would try. Well, where's my lady with the night black hair? I know she's gotta be around here somewhere, well.
This was actually the first thing I wrote after about a 5-month compositional absence. I wasn't adjusting to college very well. I was actually a lot happier hiding out in my car, just staring at the sky and the trees instead of going to class. One morning before leaving home for class, it had just rained. I looked out the kitchen window, saw a quickly fading rainbow, and that was that. The rainbow fades, doesn't last all day. The song was about those all too fleeting moments in life. In the end, this one musically became kind of a response to my classmates that were writing these rigidly structured songs loaded with pointlessly abstract chord changes. You know, the ones that take 8 extra long fingers to play. The song barely maintains a verse-chorus structure, and took the somewhat jazz-informed approach to adding and playing around with a single extra note in otherwise basic chords.
My mind must be deceiving me. I've seen a face enough to remember. Ah, but the rainbow fades, doesn't last all day.
Well, it wouldn't be one of my albums without some "please cover my songs. This was one of the ones I came up with after deciding I needed to make that unabashed mainstream singer-songwriter album if I was ever going to get my foot in the door. I don't particularly like this one. It kind of feels like a bunch of 70s singer-songwriterisms thrown into a blender, with unsurprisingly jumbled results.
Well, it won't be long until the daylight fades away on a path with those dreams that we knew we'd never see come true. They fade to blue.
Given my penchant for less than contemporary music and media in general, it shouldn't come as any surprise that I was more eager than most 19, 20-year-olds to listen to my elders. This one was about trying to learn from them while they were still around to listen to. Musically, it's undercooked. Now, I should note that this is the one and only song I completely overhauled when I remixed this album. The tempo is so sloppy, the best I could do was try and process the hell out of the drums, as well as extract and mutilate a copy of the drum track into resembling a primitive drum machine. All for, at least, the illusion of stability.
Sitting there, sweet eyes, childlike. There's something in there that's telling me I know more than you ever will. So take me down with you when you go. 'Cause there's just so many things I still need to know.
And this is where the album's concept starts going off the rails. I'd initially set out to make my big mainstream record, but as it got closer to recording time, the more I'd grown uncomfortable with it. As the writing process wore on, I allowed myself to do some more abstract and jammed out tracks. I also allowed myself to bring back this little gem from the fall of 2004. This one came to me after getting a little too invested in a slasher flick that I was watching, only to come to the conclusion that I probably shouldn't get too attached to the characters in such a type of movie. Musically, it was an odd, nearly structureless, but arguably effective cross between low-key horror movie music and Paul Simon's American Tune. This one was cut in one live take during the overdub sessions.
Oh, she's just another scream queen. Now if I could only to watch you fall, and this is where I get off.
What I was looking for in the clips is something that I could catch that would distinguish myself from other entries.
Even this album couldn't escape the silent film trap. This was my 2005 entry into the Turner Classic Movies Young Film Composers competition, recorded at home that January. The film du jour was 1923's Souls for Sale, which, if memory serves, is about a woman's rise in show business. The provided scene involved a circus tent burning down. Yeah, the title becomes a teeny bit less cryptic now, doesn't it? For what it's worth, I, once again, didn't make it past the first round. Now, this one wasn't initially intended for the album, but as I was assembling the final project, given that this was where side 2, if it were an LP or cassette, would have started, it seemed like a good interlude, and an even better segue into the following song. Also, I've long since lost the film clip that this synced to, and unfortunately I don't think I could remember the exact point in the film if my life depended on it. This was the last song written for the album. I'd realized that there were no real rockers on the album, so I quickly cooked up this little deadpan parody of all those "I'm a badass outlaw" type songs.
You got something that belongs to me. Those are words I said. I took the money and put a bullet in his head. When fugitive on the run, fugitive ain't got no place to run.
This is the album's second and final "Please Cover My Song" and this is also the best of them. So the idea here was to write a country ballad, which could be fairly easily covered by most flavors of country singers. Of course, not exactly having a country voice, I decided to up the rock quotient a bit and make it an all-around slicker track than anything else on the record. In the end, I wound up with kind of a vaguely psychedelic country rock thing. Oh yeah, and I really wanted a pedal steel guitar on this one, but of course didn't own one, never played one, and knew nobody that had ever so much as touched one. I wound up faking it as best as I could on a lap steel with a volume pedal and a ton of reverb. It sounds somewhere halfway between a trumpet and an air raid siren.
It'll do that till the day we die. And sometimes late at night, when that lonesome wind moans, I think about that look in a raspberry rye.
Admittedly, this was the point where I'd gotten so sick of the singer-songwriter thing that I just wanted to take a long guitar solo. This track took less time to write than it did to actually play the damn thing. Of course, the title would imply that, being a Midwestern white boy, I probably wasn't qualified to play the blues, and just barely qualified to play the blues.
Crying all night long. stupid song.
If you would have asked me at the time what this song was about, I would have said I was taking people's egos to task, because that's what I thought it was. Looking back on it, I think I can safely say that it was really about myself, and I just didn't realize it. This is the one song we couldn't get in during the basic tracking session, hence this ultra lean acoustic arrangement, which was cut very quickly during the overdub sessions.
Don't you know there's somebody else out there waiting? Just push you out of the spotlight. Well, tell me what you're gonna do about that. Tell me what you see in a life like that. And you're laughing cause you know no other, crying cause someone stole your thunder, and it's just as well, cause everybody's got their own ideas.
When I went back and remixed this album, I decided to take a quick shot at this one, just casually at home. I did this because it was the only song from the album that I'd ever revised. Somewhere down the line, I'd started playing this one at live gigs on a 12-string guitar and at one whole step lower than the original version. This may have been the last time I ever played this one. If not, it was next to last, as I played my unceremonious final show around the same time. The sound quality is poor, but again, I just wanted to get it down on tape, strictly a posterity recording. This one's currently lurking as an album-only bonus track on the Greetings from Elderbush Gulch remix.
But the rainbow fades, doesn't last all day. But if I could just hold the moment, well then these memories I'd surely repay. Yeah.
Alright, I promised I'd get back to this. As I mentioned, I was unhappy with the original mix and master of this album. In 2010, I'd finally taken the plunge and purchased an MBox 2 Pro audio interface, Pro Tools, and a massive bundle of third-party plugins. In April of 2011, the old Greetings from Elderbush Gulch had finally crawled up my ass to the point where I just couldn't stand it anymore. If nothing else, I wanted to root around the multi-tracks myself, which I'd never been able to do, and see if I could improve on what I had. Hell, I'd only built up another 5 years of experience by then. But like a bad joke, as it turned out, the remix couldn't escape the craziness of the original 2006 sessions. The files were in the already archaic Mac-only format SD2. I was still strictly a PC person back then. I wound up having to take the multi-tracks to a Pro Tools guru I'd met on the duck.avid boards, who not only was a Mac user, but still had a period-appropriate copy of Pro Tools on hand. $50 and a public how not to record lecture later, I had shiny new WAV files of all the audio from my little album. The multi-tracks were every bit as bad as they'd been 5 years earlier. I wound up completely stripping down the tracks, resyncing the drums, and going through each and every track, processing each one into its own unique strain of oblivion just so it would all match. It took me about 6 weeks, working on it nearly every day, to reassemble the album. The plugins and overall patching on the remix were, out of necessity, extreme, to the point where I wouldn't wish those multi-tracks on my worst enemy. Nonetheless, I finished the remix and reissued it, download only, 5 years to the day after the original release. It was done with zero fanfare and zero promotion. It was strictly a labor of love. Well, at least one thing was easy about the album. Seeing as I didn't release West of Elderbush Gulch, which already had good existing artwork to go on, I simply replaced the title text on the old West packaging. Since I was already dealing with a mock postcard concept, I decided to adopt the more appropriate title, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch, a parody of Bruce Springsteen's Greetings from Asbury Park. In the end, I sank about $1,100 into the making of this album, which really wasn't that much when you consider that this was for the musicians, the studio time, the pressing, the copyrights, the whole ball of wax. But then again, you get what you pay for, don't you? So, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch was released on August 8th, 2006, and I did everything in my power to promote it, except play live. So, here's what happened. During that gap between the basic tracking session and the overdub sessions, I decided that I'd had enough of the open mic nights and trying to cold call club owners and stuff. Believe me, I played quite a bit in 2005, but yeah, I was just over it. So aside from that, I was able to get the album into a handful of Denver area record stores, and at least one outside of Denver. I actually had this little poster made at the time, and this hung in at least one Denver area record store window, so it got a little publicity, I guess. As far as I know, this is the only surviving copy, my own private copy of it. I also sent copies of the album into all the local publications and a few national indie publications for review. I threw everything I had at it. But unsurprisingly, it was for naught. It got no reviews. I couldn't give away the 100 copies that I'd had pressed. As far as I know, building on that, none of the copies in the record stores ever sold, and the album didn't sell at all until years later after I'd remixed and reissued it, and more importantly, started making Oddity Archive. Now, funnily enough, my main takeaway from this at the time was not so much that I'd made a rough album, although, believe me, I was plenty aware of it, but I felt like I hadn't been true to myself. So, in other words, I felt like I had tried a little too hard to be a good little folky singer-songwriter, and I'd kinda suppressed everything else. So, it was no longer just a component of what I did, but the whole picture. So with that, I decided that I was done being a good little singer-songwriter, and it was just as well because I never got on too well with the folkies anyway. But anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I don't conclude my little saga. Yeah, there's only one more chapter to go. So, I think for a while here, as always, I'm going to have to go back to doing, good archive episodes again and try and pull myself back out of the mud, but yeah, I will finish it eventually. I'll talk to you again soon. And welcome to my penance for having a couple of successful episodes. Today, I want to resume my little Ben's Music career subseries, sometimes known as You Never Know When to Quit, Do You? To which I say, I actually finally got the message. This is the final chapter of this little sub-series of mine. So with that, today we're going to, as much as you can at least, speed through the last 14 years or so as of my making this. And we're going to take a look at some abandoned projects, some one-offs, Pavanned, the archive's usual theme song, and of course my last and possibly final album, and in my opinion my least worst album, and what's on the box today, Minn-Knot from 2010. If I got anything out of Greetings from Elderbush Gulch, regardless of how it turned out, it was that I had no future as even a minor pop star, which was just as well. I'd spent the first 2 years of college perpetually dealing with the egos of all the other wannabe hotshots I went to class with, and at war with most of my teachers. Between the album and my day-to-day life, my lust for fame pretty well died. As such, I shifted my focus from would-be fame to behind the scenes, be it in production or as a sideman, whichever world would take me. My own music was now just a glorified hobby. Having said that, I still wanted a decent studio-recorded album to my name, so I started saving up for one last full-blown studio album to be made at some undetermined time. Well, if nothing else, I still had my adventurous/pretentious streak intact. The main unrealized project from this time was tentatively called the Avant-Garde Files. As the name implies, it was going to be a series of mostly abrasive sound collages. My little quirk was that I wanted it to be done with only virtual instruments and other electronic noises, no so-called real instruments. But given that my collages were all pretty similar and were all clocking in at around 1 minute apiece, the project was, unsurprisingly, quickly dropped. Given the constant mispronunciation of my last name, I knew right out of the gate that I wanted the new album to be called, phonetically, Minn-Knot. I added the silent K just to be a jerk. And yes, the title is half a reference to pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. Anyway, I'd since retreated back to my old cassette rig, plus some digital overdubs, but really now just to record demos. I guess I just wanted some kind of potential product to have out there with this one, so it wouldn't seem like I'd gone dormant. Of the 5 songs here, 2 of them failed to make the final cut for what became Minn-Knot. I'll only touch on those 2 here. The other 3 will be covered in their final versions. One of a very long line of rather warped love songs I wrote between 06 and 09. I think I dropped this one because it sounded too much like something that would have gone on Greetings from Elderbush Gulch, which I was trying to avoid.
No, I wasn't gonna give you my heart.
If memory serves, this one was inspired by all the money and celeb-obsessed reality and tabloid TV shows that were going on at the time, and alas still are. It seemed like these people could do anything they wanted, and still can. And so, of course, I was more than eager to take the piss out of it. And yes, that was a snipe at Amy Winehouse in the final verse.
Put me in rehab, I said no. It's so hard to be important when you're sweating and cold. The guy interviewing me has to wear a blindfold, and I'd break this guy's neck for a glass of Bordeaux. Pathetic beauty, another case of pathetic beauty.
I mentioned back on Volume 3 that I absolutely hated the wig-wag, white guy with acoustic guitar movement, especially John Mayer and Jack Johnson, even though the movement was dying off by this point. This would have been a lot more effective 3 or 4 years earlier. Regardless, I still had enough venom left in my system to make a, rather mean-spirited, satirical EP. Of course, going to school and sharing stages with a metric ton of wigwags probably didn't hurt. Anyway, I adopted the alias James H. Tartan for this one. Damned if I remember what the H stood for, though. And posed as a hyperconformist, ultra-crass, stereotypical wigwag. This was recorded in fits and starts between May and August of '07. Much to my chagrin, this got a lot more attention than Preludes. In retrospect, I don't know why I was so shocked by this. One thing I noticed about John Mayer was that he loved his major seventh and suspended chords. So I wrote a little artificially laid-back thing using almost exclusively major sevenths and sus chords. And of course, it being a John Mayer pastiche, I tried to be trite and deep at the same time.
And I've looked in my mind, and there's nothing there. I don't care if anyone stops to stare. You're through the window of my mind. La la la.
Well, every good libido-driven wigwag needs to appear sensitive. So I wrote this willfully shallow, overly basic love song. I have no idea what's up with the sound quality on this one.
I love you, baby. Love you.
Jack Johnson always liked to play the role of the good-natured, laid-back, beach bum, beach party guy, so a pastiche/parody of what I used to call his Sunshine and Birkenstocks songs was very much in order. This was the only track I bothered to give the full band treatment.
Yes, I feel so fine. Sunshine, sundown. It's gonna be a party tonight.
I guess this is where James's mask slid off and revealed his true nature. It was bound to happen. Like You Turn Me On Like a Light Bulb 4 years earlier, This took off on some forgotten MP3 platform, MySpace perhaps, I don't remember. And like Lightbulb, I was too dumb to try and cash in on it. Oh well.
I'm a genius, 'cause I told you so. Wisdom in pieces, off for 99 cents. But down tastes great, less villain. I'm a hanger on to calm concerns like war and bombs, and you not in my arms. Yeah, problems, no solutions. Well, John and James and Jack and Dave, we love you too. Please don't say it, can't wait for change, 'cause I know you do too.
I graduated from the University of Colorado at Denver, or UCD, in May of 2008, right into the loving arms of the Great Recession. As such, instead of landing a job a little closer to my field, I wound up signing on to a local staging company, whereupon I was sent to most of the major venues in and around Denver and became a stage grunt. Nice use of a degree there, Benny boy. While I eventually spun off into hotel AV and mostly business as opposed to entertainment events, I spent that first year slinging gear for nearly every major artist that passed through town, the most bitter pill coming almost immediately in the summer of 2008, doing a 3 a.m. load-in for my old classmates, The Fray. Like any good American college student, I'd spent my junior and senior years developing a nice drinking habit, which got considerably worse after graduation. If there was any good side to it, I turned out to be a brooding poetry-writing drunk, which led to a bumper crop of songs, only a few of which I actually kept. Nonetheless, I somehow remained focused enough to keep my eye on the perceived prize of my next album. I guess in some perverse way, the heavens aligned for me in the summer of 2009. Out of nowhere, I was asked to be one of the opening acts for that year's Underground Music Showcase, Denver's answer to South by Southwest. I, of course, accepted, even though I hadn't played live outside of a school setting in over 3 years. But I'd been working crew both day and night, setting up the short-lived Mile High Music Fest, which occurred on the same weekend. And I was completely exhausted, unrehearsed, probably beer buzzed, and proceeded to fall flat on my face in front of every rock journalist in the region. I couldn't remember any of my songs, new or old. Conversely, I'd saved up about $3,000. I felt like I had a good album's worth of songs among the mountains of demos I'd recorded over the last 3 years. It was time for redemption. In August of 2009, I decided it was time to finally cut Minn-Knot. If anything, Minn-Knot was my deciding factor in sobering up. For what it's worth, I had my last drink sometime over Labor Day weekend that year. I also decided that I wanted to split the difference in personnel between the small band on Greetings and the one-man band stuff prior to that. So I only brought in one other musician, drummer Zach Morris, who alas bore no resemblance whatsoever to the Saved by the Bell character. I have no idea whatever happened to him. Anyway, Zach was still a student at UCD, so we used the opportunity to lock ourselves away into one of the many very tiny rehearsal rooms on campus, whereupon we proceeded to woodshed 10 out of the 15 projected tracks for Minn-Knot over the span of a couple of weeks. One song was ultimately dropped. On September 26th and 27th of 2009, we went into Laskin Productions, a converted house/recording studio with a 48-track console and the latest version of Pro Tools HD, in Littleton, Colorado, to lay down the pertinent tracks for the album. In fits and starts over the next nearly 3 months, I returned to Laskin many times to record the rest of and mix and master Minn-Knot. The remaining sessions were uneventful, by design. There was no real concept to Minn-Knot. It was just what I felt were my best songs, arranged in such a way that they would hopefully play well as a whole work. Though in the end, Minn-Knot seemed like 2 mini albums. As such, I half-jokingly divided the album like an LP or cassette and named each so-called side Min and Knot. Actually, about half of Minn-Knot was written prior to Greetings from Elderbush Gulch, but the songs were dropped either because they were underdeveloped or were what I deemed uncommercial. Dark to Light was started sometime in '05 on some morning where the sun seemed to be shining, by my perception, a little odd. At the time, the song was pretty dry and dull, so it was shelved. I brought it back for Preludes to Minn-Knot in '07, where I revised the lyrics a bit. Sometime after acquiring a Dean Electric 12-string guitar, which wound up informing a good chunk of this album, I dropped the key by a half step to accommodate the extra tension on a 12-string, and tweaked the lyrics again. This time, it stuck. In the end, it was kind of a merger between American and British folk rock.
Well, the sun shines a little differently these days. Or should I say, hardly at all. And everything seems a little upside down. Things seem a little strange. And everything seems to turn around. Can make it rearrange.
I reversed the classic girl feeling chained to her guy lyric for this one. Oddly enough, I didn't know initially what name I wanted to use for the addressee of the lyric. I just knew it needed to be monosyllabic. So soon after, it was just dumb luck that at the top of my then regular heap of LPs on my floor was a horrible pressing of Kate Bush's The Kickin' Side. Hey, it worked. The extended My Sharona-esque instrumental break was added and expanded later on.
Well, Kate, you're bringing me down. It's too little, it's too late. But you know I just might take the bait. Well, any other woman could make me wait. You'd like to see me crawl now, would you? Kate.
The first of 4, all rather eerie instrumentals on the album, and the first of 3 stabs at minimalist classical composition on here. This one was started on the guitar, but later transferred to piano, where it finally took shape. I'm still trying to figure out what time signature this thing was supposed to be in. another one written and rejected for Greetings. Initially, this was just the 3 short verses with a mindless 2-chord vamp between each one. Somewhere down the line, I came up with a heavily structured instrumental piece, which still felt more like a few stray ideas than an actual song. Remembering that the existing Purple Sky was of a similar tone, I added the lyrics between each main instrumental idea, and the tune finally came together. I wound up overdubbing a second drum kit on parts of this one.
Blue eyes, Halloween, vampire girl, and she's looking sweet. Hammerline, red blood, so cold just before run.
The album's only "Please Cover My Song" song. Having said that, I didn't put it on the album because I thought it had cover potential, but because I felt like I had a decent pop song. Something I have very, very few of.
Gonna sit in the dark till my feelings fade, until my heart has left its mark. Just let the night fade, so I can forget about you. Yeah, let the night fade. Well, maybe I'll get some sleep tonight.
The album's second instrumental, and the second bit of minimalist composition. I'm pretty sure I'd just discovered the Eastern double harmonic scale here and was just intent on using it. The song's subtitle was a bit of wordplay. Entrance, entrance, Eastern stuff. Yeah, whatever. The instrumental Elderbush Saga was supposed to end with the burial at Elderbush Gulch back in '04, but the chord progression to this one just screamed Elderbush, so I brought the name back one last time. This was another one written in '05 for Greetings, but left off because I didn't want any full-length instrumental tunes on that album. I wound up jumping behind the drum kit for this song. I'd never played a full kit before, and it kinda showed. And so we begin the not half of the album. This one dates back to '04, but was rejected for Greetings for 2 reasons. One, the music was incredibly dry and dull, and 2, I really wanted to write a song about seeing something in someone that no one else could see. Of course, it came out a bit warped. It seemed to be more about falling prey than anything else. I brought this back for Preludes to Minn-Knot in '07, by which time I'd come to embrace the lyrics. I pretty much rewrote the music, though. The sound effects on this one mark the only released use of Bennytronics, which was just me making noise with a bunch of random guitar effects pedals, kind of a parody of Robert Fripp's Frippertronics. An edited version of this one was released as Minn-Knot's single at the time, to no avail.
She's an angel in black. She's an angel in disguise. You can't stop staring into your deep dark eyes. But you look like the devil, but it feels like heaven to me. Dressed in black, running out of time.
Two summers in a row, I'd lost some unrelated, much-loved elder neighbors of mine, which got me ruminating about death. This was effectively a jumble of thoughts about a potential hereafter and some of those uniquely quirky funeral traditions, pennies over the eyes being admittance to heaven, and so on.
We paid your admittance with the pennies on your eyes. It gets so thick, and then we find that there is blood in the wine.
For the past 5 years, aspiring film composers ages 18 to 35 from around the United States have entered the Young Film Composers Competition.
And the Turner Classic Movies Young Film Composers Competition, and by turn Silent Film Music, rears its ugly head one last time. By 2009, the competition had ceased to exist, which was just as well. It had gotten a little bleak. One of the past winners committed suicide in '05, and there just seemed to be a real cloud hanging over it after that. Anyway, I still wrote little pieces of music for the competition, but had long since stopped submitting them. It had also become a bit of a tradition to have my titles for these things become unintentionally cryptic. See Souls for Sale, Circus Fire Scene. While the 1927 film The Show was the movie du jour at one point, my little 56-second tune was unrelated to the film. The title was 100% pure, intentional self-parody. And yes, this is the last of the 3 minimalist instrumentals. On the surface, this is a rather cranky, bruised relationship song, but it was really a metaphor for my increasingly sour experiences in music. It was basically my way of saying, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?"
Well, I'll play the part of the broken heart, but you do the crying now. You wanna ring? Go ahead and ring. Just don't make like this rose of blue again. Right down the drain, going right down the drain. But sometimes things are just better that way. So go ahead and ring.
I was kind of into dream analysis on and off for a few years. This one stemmed from a series of dreams I had in early '08. One about Warren Zevon, who died in '03, one about a lost love, and one about being chased by an angry mob and finding safety in an elevator. After each dream in real life, I woke up thinking, well, a lot of good that did me. Given that the arrangement to this one just keeps building and building to the point of absurdity, I decided to throw it right over the cliff for the song's final minute by throwing in my, to date only, backwards hidden message. Me reading a couple of excerpts from Ed Wood's pseudo-memoir, Hollywood Rat Race. And lastly, in case you were curious about the significance of the Stuffed Squirrel Suite, since these three songs all segue into each other, and they're arguably the three most artsy-fartsy tunes on the album, and when playing live, I started regularly playing live again later in '09, I always played these tunes in one shot, I started referring to it as the Stuffed Squirrel Suite, just for a little pretentious humor. It was also a good way to kill 10 minutes on stage.
And a lot of good did me all these things that I feel. A lot of good did me, though I know it's not sincere.
I've spent many hours pondering those actors who hate Hollywood. The New York stage, they shout. That's the only place for an actor or actress. That's the only place to really act. They shout at the top of their lungs to all who will listen, and their shouting is so loud that those of us who don't care to listen have our hearing devices infiltrated anyway. We cannot ignore them. Yet I don't even care to ignore them. I want to know these haters.
Even though I was never terribly happy working local crew, I built up a few good war stories. This song was intended as a Chuck Berry-styled barrage of imagery, and everything mentioned in the lyrics had some degree of truth to it. I really did get nearly impaled by Madonna's couch. I really did watch Grateful Dead drummer Mickey Hart's drum kit fly right off a loading dock, and got nearly clocked by runaway rigging motors more times than I care to admit. On a related note, as a joke, I thanked all the artists I'd worked for in the liner notes for inadvertently funding my little album.
She had 37 costumes, only 15 songs. Had no idea a dress could be that long. She had a couch, it was purple with gold trim. I almost impaled myself trying to carry it in. Got a wrench in my pocket and in my plans. I can't let down 20,000 screaming fans. No, this job's not such a cinch. A swinging 2-ton motor just missed me by an inch. Well, I never signed up for this. I only wanted to see the show.
Ending the album on an unintentionally mildly jazzy note, one based around my electric 12-string no less, I'd started writing a hopelessly romantic lyric about some lovelorn guy wandering around a beach, realized how silly it sounded, and warped it into a tune about some love-happy dork wandering on the beach during a storm. To bring the not half of the album full circle, I reprised the Benny-tronics from Angel in Black over the storm noises that close this track. Oh yeah, and I wound up taking drum duties on this one too, playing something of an unintentional samba.
My heart's melted again. Cold sand run through my veins. My heart and my eyes are trying to It's me, yo. Through the cold wind, I wanna hear my name. Through the cold wind, I don't wanna feel this way. The cold wind, it's not gonna happen to me again.
By this point, I'd long since settled on the bad amateur photography motif for my album covers, because I can't draw or paint to save my life. Having said that, I don't really remember where the scrapbook idea came from for this one, and yes, it was assembled on real scrapbooking paper. My guess is I didn't want my cover to just be some stray Polaroid shot. And speaking of Polaroid, by the time I took this pic, Polaroid film had been discontinued, and I'm pretty sure the last of the old stock had recently expired. So I wound up taking the shot digitally, went to Walmart and got a couple prints of it made, left it out for a bit to accrue some dust, and then digitally inserted it into an old Polaroid frame. Oddly enough, the actual old Preludes cover. As for the photos, both this and the cover to Preludes to Minn-Knot were taken from the vantage point of my parents' back porch. Incidentally, the same vantage point that inspired the song These Memories back on Greetings from Elderbush Gulch. Anyway, I believe the Minn-Knot pic was shot around Halloween of 2008. The sky has that uniquely purple tint to it that tends to happen in Colorado at dusk in autumn. Fit with the song Purple Sky, I guess. The text was done on my dad's old hand-me-down typewriter, which has since been used for archive. And yes, the back of the booklet was intended as a joke. I borderline literally bankrupted myself making Minn-Knot. After writing the check for the last recording session, I was down to my last $3 and change. I had to live on a credit card for a couple of months. Anyway, as such, I couldn't afford to release the album. It took until June of 2010 for me to put aside about $300 to get 50 copies of the album made and send it out to anyone that I thought might give the album a little ink or airplay. I wasn't expecting the album to get any real traction, and I was right. The only two things to come out of it were a surprisingly positive review from the Colorado Music Buzz that October, and I later learned that legendary East Orange, New Jersey-based freeform radio station WFMU spun The Wire at about 4:30 on some obscure Sunday morning. The album only started selling a little after Oddity Archive got established. And as of my making this, I still have a few of the original 50 copies kicking around. And in case you're curious, I dropped about $3,300 into the making of this album. It was a kamikaze mission if there ever was one. To my utter amazement, especially after my disastrous performance at the Underground Music Showcase, the phone started periodically ringing for me to perform the odd gigs starting in the summer of '09, and despite not having a band, occasionally playing the odd rock club, which I much preferred to the coffee houses. I always seemed to play better to a rock crowd. While I started putting on much better shows, I never was able to build a following. After playing to a literally empty room in July of 2011, I decided to hang up my guitar. Minn-Knot was supposed to be a new beginning, not my swan song. Indeed, I had 2 projects in the works as of 2011, which of course were abandoned. One was another rock album, tentatively called Available Space, inspired by those signs you see in empty lots and vacant strip malls. This album was to be mostly recorded at home, with the drums being recorded remotely by session musicians. Any real keyboards, like a real piano, would have still had to have been done in a studio. The other abandoned project was called Silence is Golden, see Volume 1. Since the original 2001 Silence is Golden had never been released, I figured it was time to finally follow through with the originally intended silent film concept. This time, it was to be an all-acoustic, all-instrumental, and homemade mix of period covers, mostly from sheet music I'd collected featuring silent film stars on the artwork. And aside from that, there would have been a few original would-be movie, not necessarily theme songs, and at least a partial score to Buster Keaton's 1922 short, Cops. Not a single note of either project ever got recorded. Sort of. Well, I don't think I'm gonna get away with dodging the archive's theme song, so here goes. When I started making Oddity Archive in mid-2012, the theme song was XTC's 1982 rock radio hit, Senses Working Overtime. Not wanting to deal with any copyright issues, I dropped it after the 4th episode. Problem was, the ideas just weren't poppin'. So I sifted through my back stock of unrecorded material for any short, hopefully reasonably catchy thing that might work. I pulled an unfinished piece, written on ukulele of all things, called The Kind of Girl Your Mother Must Have Been, which was originally to tie in with a scene in Harold Lloyd's 1925 film The Freshman. This became the middle section of my little theme song to be. Realizing it sounded like a middle section, I needed an ideally extra short and simple framework to hang it on, which is where I, on the fly, barfed out those 4 now famous notes on my mandolin. The recording took place over a single afternoon. I remember I found that the more stuff I added to it, probably because it was such a threadbare tune, the better it sounded. So after considerable aural sweetening, I finally had my theme tune. Upon listening back, it sounded to me like a Pavanned, which is a Renaissance-era, sedate, processional dance music. Smartass that I am, I figured having written something like that in the 21st century, it better be in the past tense. Hence, Pavanned. Now, I've been asked many times over the last several years, do I ever plan on making and releasing another album? And my stock response has become maybe. And so the most likely thing you'd see out of me at this point, I think, would be some kind of Oddity Archive soundtrack album. I mean, I have been trying to do some new incidental music for this show for about 1.5 years now. But a few of those tracks have been released as digital singles, so as far as an album goes, it hinges on A, do I have an album's worth of material, and B, do I think I have a solid album's worth of material? Now, as far as another more standard rock pop singer-songwriter kind of album, if the time, money, and inspiration ever allow, I might, but honestly, it's just not a priority. Now, before I wrap things up here, there's actually one point that I've been sitting on since certainly Volume 2, if not since the beginning. And that's because I wanted to save it for those of you that have stuck through this little sub-series of mine right to the bitter end. All 4 of you. And that is that there's actually a moral to my story. And that moral would be, with regards to any kind of creative endeavor, just fucking do it. And I'm not gonna censor that F-bomb there. I think I earned that one. So my attitude is, make that record, make that movie, paint that painting. You don't have to release it. But if you do, and I kind of recommend that you do, no matter how much you suck, no matter how many slings and arrows you take for it, it's still, and I can say this from both personal experience and from friends, that it's a hell of a lot better than not knowing what might have been, because that is what will eat away at you for the rest of your life. It's so weird having a moral to Oddity Archive. I think I'm getting soft in my old age. Anyway, that's it for today's archive. You can breathe a sigh of relief now.